Welcome in, everybody, to your weekly Tuesday Fantasy Pros Championship live draft coverage. I'm your host, Aidan LaCory. Joining me, as always, Dave Nicole, and special guest from Established the Run, Justin Herzig. Justin, thank you so much for joining us.
Cheers. Appreciate you having me.
Off the bat, let's just get it tipped off because another big news day. We have, obviously, the Brandon Aiyuk trade news really ramped up last night and accelerated today with reports from a lot of insiders. And then we get news that Christian McCaffrey is out this whole preseason, a calf strain. The Niners are kind of preaching that it's a minor thing, not serious, don't worry. But we see here just he goes at the 102. He's been going at the 101. Pretty much all these drafts. CeeDee Lamb goes first overall. So, Justin, I'll start with you. What are you thinking about this McCaffrey injury news? Any concern? Is it going to drop his ADP a bit? Or are people just going to assume that all is okay and he'll be ready for week one? What are your thoughts on that situation?
Yeah, personally, I would say I think there is a little concern just because calf injuries can linger. Like, I don't think he's going to miss week one, but you never like when a player is going into the season unhealthy. That said, I think there's just such a large gap between him and the other running backs that, like, he still is my 1.01. But if you want to go for a structure where you want to start with a wide receiver, you want to go Lamb first, especially like in a PPR format, like, I'm not going to fight you on it. I still think it's probably McCaffrey, but like, yeah, I think those two are just still very, very strong.
Terp, obviously we've been, we preach a little caution on this show about Christian McCaffrey. It burned us last year. Is this kind of fitting our narrative? Obviously, by no means are we against McCaffrey. We understand the reasoning, but as you have said on the show, you have Bijan Robinson. We've had people on the show who have come out and said that Breece Hall is their top running back. What are your thoughts on the McCaffrey injury news and how is it affecting your draft when you're drafting at the top of fantasy?
I don't think it's going to change much personally. I mean, I think he's going to stay in the top 5 unless you get some sort of bad news, which you won't get before week one. I mean, he just, after last year, it's really hard to fade the guy. He just shows, I mean, there's nobody behind him. They don't trust Mitchell. He's always hurt. Jordan Mason, we're hearing some, positive press in preseason. But those guys are just names at this point. Nobody really seems like they're taking the job. I mean, a lot of coach speak here and there on who is going to be the backup. I don't think it's going to move much personally. I think he's going to stay in the top 5. I mean, the calf injury, he's getting up there in age a little bit, so that's a worry. I think you're going to see receivers get pushed up a little bit more. The Tyreek Hills, Jefferson Chase, St. Brown, guys like that. I could see that some of these guys, taking a risk and moving those guys up a little bit more, just with the injury, because people, every time they draft, no matter what anybody says, if they see a little Q next to somebody's name, they panic, they freak out. And they think like, oh, I can't take this guy, or I got to push this guy and take some guy over. And yeah, it's very worrisome in August, 31st and September 3rd. But like right now, I don't think it's anything to worry about. It's smart by a team that's trying to win a Super Bowl to not put him out there in a useless preseason game and a useless practice. So I'm not that worried, but I mean, he's not my running back 1. So if anything, this might drop him into a spot where I can get him a little bit more at a little bit of a cheaper discount. Not much because he's not going to drop much, but overall, not worried.
And obviously, as I mentioned, the other big news from yesterday into today was Brandon Aiyuk. So we've been saying, and there's been a lot of people, all the guests we've had on this show, you've been hearing reporters say is that more than likely we think he's going to stay in San Francisco. They'll get a contract worked out or an agreement with her play this year. A lot of this is just noise. Well, that kind of shifted yesterday. We learned that the Niners have deals in place with the Cleveland Browns and the New England Patriots. It's just kind of up to Aiyuk figuring out the contract situation with those teams. The Steelers are reportedly involved. The Commanders, by reports, have pulled out. But certainly a dramatic change from, I think, what some people were expecting in this kind of Brandon Aiyuk saga. And Justin, you came on in kind of our little green room right before the show, and you were kind of pretty staunch in your take on where Aiyuk's going to end up. And I'd like to also know if you could kind of dissect of all the 3 really realistic landing spots that he's going to, which seem more likely than him winding up in San Francisco right now. What is the fantasy impact of each of those?
Yeah, and so let's first start off with the macro aspect. Like, how often do you hear about a potential trade happening and the logistics of a deal is in place with multiple teams and it's just up to the player? Like, that doesn't just organically come out. That is very clearly San Francisco is leaking that for a set purpose. And in my opinion, they know that, hey, Brandon Aiyuk doesn't want to go to Cleveland. He doesn't want to go to New England. He wants to go to Pittsburgh, maybe Washington. He's very clear on that. But they wanted to publicly show that, you know what, if you want to leave San Francisco, you want to leave our championship caliber team, here, we've got 2 teams, we've got deals in place, go figure it out. And that's going to do one of 2 things. It's either going to be like, hey, we gave you the opportunity. Aiyuk, Brandon, if you want it, go for it. If you don't, then come back and we'll figure it out. Or it also publicly gets teams like the Steelers where he actually wants to go to kind of raise their what they're willing to give in the trade. And that's what it did sound like where Pittsburgh's out of it. Then they're back in. Washington's out of it. Doesn't sound like they're coming back in. But in my opinion, it's going to get done with the Steelers. It may already be done. Obviously, we had maybe a Freudian slip, or Christian McCaffrey just said what he said, where he called Brandon Aiyuk a former teammate. So I think most likely it is going to be the Steelers. I think more than anything, it's just he's gone from San Francisco. I think from what I'm hearing, that's just relationship is beyond repair. So when we dissect the impact, let's at least start with the Steelers. Start with the 49ers, because that, if he's gone, what does that mean? Debo, in the small sample that Aiyuk was out, his target share was insane. It was in, I think, like mid-30s off top of my head. So I could see Debo moving up to kind of the top, maybe middle of the second round, maybe in that like 14, 15 spot. Christian McCaffrey, if there was any doubt, I mean, his workload can increase, especially in the passing game. So we still have one. And then Kittle's probably like the sneaky where if they actually need to use Kittle as a pass catcher and not just his kind of pass blocking here, receiver here, he could turn into a top 2, top 3 tight end season. The Pearsall, the Juwan Jennings, the whoever comes back from the trade as well, like will play a role. But from an elite standpoint, I think that McCaffrey, Debo, Kittle could be huge home runs. So I'll pause there and then we can kind of discuss the hypotheticals of the other teams.
No, I think the Debo ADP today is going to be really interesting. Obviously, this was the first day of drafts at the FFPC, really since the news has broken. And everyone's obviously kind of focusing on Aiyuk. But as you mentioned, there's a lot of positive Debo stats out there when Aiyuk's gone. It's going to be intriguing to see how much he rises. Does Kittle rise? Because obviously, as we can already see, and we've been seeing in these FantasyPros Championship, FFPC main events drafts where it's tight end premium and the tight ends go so early and often. Well, is Kittle going to kind of rise into that Evan Ingram, Kyle Pitts range now that Aiyuk's not a weapon? And you haven't even mentioned, Justin, does this mean that they're liking what they're seeing or seen from Ricky Pearsall? They drafted him in the first round. That's just another name, another weapon that they have. So really an interesting spot. Terp, of the 3 that obviously Justin mentioned that has been rumored, none of them are great. All of them are a downgrade from San Francisco. Let's say it's one of those 3. As a drafter, which one are you? And we got to talk about Puka too, as he just goes at 2-7. But back to Aiyuk. Of the 3, where do you want him to go? Essentially, what's the best?
100% not Pittsburgh. I just think Pittsburgh is a complete disaster for everybody involved. Aiyuk going there pretty much kills Pickens. I mean, I think Pickens is pretty much as close to dead with Arthur Smith. I mean, we saw last year, Drake London, they couldn't figure out a way to unlock him in any way. Couldn't unlock, Kyle Pitts. What makes anybody think that he's going to unlock these 3 talented players? So that's definitely a worry there. So Pittsburgh is definitely the far last. I mean, if I had to pick, the best spot for him is probably Cleveland, but that's not. I mean, the best spot for him is San Francisco. Anybody who says anything different, I just think is just lying. I mean, him in San Francisco, he's being underdrafted right now, in my opinion. But it doesn't look like that's going to happen. It looks like he's going to be dealt. So New England, I don't know if it makes a ton of sense right off the jump. I mean, they got a lot of young, hungry receivers that seem to be having good camps on a team that's looking to develop instead of making that big splash right now. I get it. Drake May, rookie contract type of thing to get the star receiver in there. They got plenty of money to spend, but I guess that's not the worst. But, to me, it's Cleveland. But if he goes to Cleveland, that kind of makes Amari Cooper. Jerry Judy's completely worthless. Njoku takes a hit. And it's still the massive unknown of Deshaun Watson because nobody knows what you're getting from Deshaun Watson. If Deshaun Watson is Deshaun Watson from Houston, I mean, watch out. Cleveland could be a Super Bowl contender, but he's not shown that. So
like 3 years,
he's one of my highest owned quarterbacks because he's pretty much free right now. But I mean, you're betting on the upside, you're betting on the ceiling, you're betting on the rushing ability. And if you add somebody like Aiyuk, it makes a ton of sense. But none of the spots are really great. But if I had to pick, it would be Cleveland.
Justin,
Yeah,
if you, I was just going to say, if you wanted to even just rank the three for fantasy, what does that ranking look like of Aiyuk landing spots?
yeah, if Amari Cooper is involved in the trade, which is what the rumor is, I don't
Mhm.
think the Cleveland ends up being that bad.
True.
This new Cleveland style offense, last year they were fifth in neutral pace, they were first in total play volume. This year, they've re-emphasized that they want to play fast, they want to get more plays. Yesterday, Dorsey was in a quote saying, like, the more your offense is in the field, the more plays you run, the more scoring opportunities you have. We know they're going to be more pass heavy. Nick Chubb's hurt. This offense, it's purposely schemed. They're getting more motion for Deshaun Watson to succeed. And we look at where Amari Cooper is going. I think Brandon Aiyuk is a better wide receiver. I think he can get a larger target share in that offense. So while, yes, I still think it's a slight downgrade, maybe he goes from right now, like the 2-3 turn, maybe he'd move to, say probably like the 3-4 turn, maybe early 4. And that's probably a little, FFPC is a little different, obviously, with the tight ends moving up. But I think like, so maybe it's a round or so downgrade if it's Cleveland and Cooper's coming back. If Cooper's not coming back, I mean, that's just a plethora of riches for Deshaun Watson, and it's not going to be great for any of them because just more split. If we look at the Pittsburgh and the New England, I agree. I think those are probably 2 out of the worst 3 landing spots for Aiyuk in Pittsburgh. It's just going to be such a run-heavy offense. There aren't going to be that many throwing opportunities. You have 2 QBs who both take a lot of sacks, and they have. Even though Cordell Patterson was a starting running back in the depth chart today, they still have Najee Harris and Jalen Warren. Like, that's going to be a run-first team. Arthur Smith,
don't forget about him.
Yeah, we've seen Arthur Smith with the Alpha. Drake London last year wasn't pretty, so I'm not going to like anything there other than maybe it elevates the team. But from a fantasy angle, you're not liking it. And New England, long-term, I think it actually makes a lot of sense. I like the idea of pairing Brandon Aiyuk with Drake May long-term. But for this year, they're going to be so run heavy. We don't know when we see Drake May. Not happy there.
Guys, let's talk about Rams receivers. So, Justin, me interpreted a FFPC main event stream Sunday night when the news was only hours old. Puka at that time was going roughly like the 110, 111 in drafts was his ADP in the main event at least. And then he fell to that draft up, I think it was to the 202.
Correct.
So you see here in the FantasyPros Championship, we got about 2 days have passed. Nothing dramatically has changed. We know a little more about the injury, and they still expect to be fine for week 1. But clearly, it's hit fantasy owners a little bit more. He falls to the 207. Cooper Kupp continues his gradual climb back up. He goes from the 304. He was going at the 308, 309 just a couple of days ago. So Cooper Kupp up half a round. Puka Nacua down half a round. And obviously, fantasy Twitter was kind of ablaze over the last 2 days. A lot of stuff about Puka's injury history, specifically lower body injury history in college, inability to stay healthy, and that's already maybe popping up this year. So, Justin, I'll start with you and just kind of ask, again, just what do you make of that injury? Where are you taking Puka Nacua, and does his kind of past injury worries concern you entering this year, already suffering one in training camp?
Yeah, it's just anytime you get an injury before the season, the data shows that like there is increased risk of re-injury as the season goes, and we need to get it docked. And so, like, we saw DeAndre Hopkins, okay, we're docking him. I think Puka doesn't seem as serious, still going to be out there week 1, but like we still need to say there is some added risk. For me personally, I think he drops just to the end of that tier. That's like that early 2. I still have like Marvin Harrison, Drake London just above him now, where he used to be the other way. But I still think Puka, in my opinion, is ahead of that next tier of wide receivers that's really flat from, I'm looking at the board, Devontae, Olave, Nico, Kupp, Neighbors, Debo, Waddle, Devontae, like so forth. I think that's a really flat kind of in FFPC. You're talking like round 3, early round 4. And I think Puka's still ahead of that tier.
Terp, just straight up, are you drafting Cooper Kupp in this early 3rd or Puka Nacua in a mid-2nd?
I'm on the Cooper Kupp bandwagon this year, so to me, it would be Cooper Kupp. I feel like his discount's going to close here soon. I think he's going to get up in the 2nd round by the time we get to August, if there's no positive news out on Puka. If there's no guarantee he's going to be back to week 1. I mean, you know how these drafters are. Like I said it earlier, people get scared of the queue. I mean, people get scared of anything where there's something next to it that's going to show any sort of injury, whether it's the drafters who draft 1 million drafts like us or people that draft 1. They're just going to be scared to draft a guy that's going to be injured before the season. Like I was talking to my dad today. He's like, "Oh, Puka got hurt. Where's he falling to the 4th round?" No, Dad. Come on, man. No, it's not. That's not how it works. But It's just the fear that's attached to the name and the possible injury that could be serious is going to scare, average drafters around. But you could also look at it as an opportunity to pair Puka with, random combinations in these bigger fields that you don't get a chance ever. I mean, how many teams you'll be able to build a team with Puka and St. Brown, or Puka and Tyreek, or Puka and Hall, and Puka and Bijan? Never, especially in these big field tournaments. Is it risky? Of course, but if you can figure out a way that Puka's back by week 1 and has no other injuries, I mean, you're getting something that nobody else in the field has. So in that sense, it's definitely worth the risk.
Another guy who's been steadily rising and isn't even the highest we've seen him go, because we've seen guys take him at that early third, 2-3 turn even, is Malik Neighbors. But talk about a training camp MVP.
I've never seen anything like it in a really long time. I mean,
starting fights in training camp just because he can, which is a sign of an elite receiver. That's how you know that he's going to deliver. And he's also just dominating the Lions. Justin, I'm going to ask you. So he goes at the 308 here. Let me get his ADP over the last couple of days in this format in the FantasyPros Championship. He's been going at the 309, so right around ADP. But the longer we see this, and if he puts up some impressive performances in preseason games, how high do you see him going come September when we're in Las Vegas for the FFPC live events?
Yeah, it's tough because obviously, hey, PPR, he should be a beast. And that's where Daniel Jones is going to make his money, because we know that team is not going to score nearly as many touchdowns as some of the other wide receivers that are going in that area. So if he's going to thrive, he's going to thrive on volume. He's going to thrive on those receptions. And then you expect efficiency, just what we saw from him out of LSU. How high can he go? As I said, it's such a flat tier that it's really going to come down to just what are people's preferences. And I think anywhere all the way up to the Devontae Olave, I think that's his kind of ceiling on how high he can go. But even at that 3.09, when you look at who's around him, there's just so much other talent as well, like Jalen Waddle, Mike Evans. I'm huge on Devontae Smith this year, maybe playing a little more slot in that Kellen Moore Eagles offense. I mean, you can make such a good argument for any of these guys. So if somebody's like, hey, Malik Neighbors, I want that to be my guy, and you're reaching for that late 2, not going to fight you.
Guys, so it's kind of been settled now. Just at least we haven't seen Kittle go, but we've seen
real quick on Neighbors. Neighbors went tonight in the main event in the 2-7. I mean, people are going to – the hype is going to start – I haven't seen it in a really long time. The hype around this guy, is it warranted? I mean, it looks like it so far, but it's also preseason, and it's also meaningless games and practices where, they're just force feeding the ball and he's catching everything. Will that continue? I personally think it's going to continue. I think he's going to be worth, much higher than where he's been drafted. But I'm actually surprised that he fell as far as he did tonight, just with all the hype surrounding him. Taking guys like Collins with a lot more target share, around him. Cooper Kupp. Older, I know the Puka injury, but it's still the risk that's involved no matter what you hear in the preseason. I'm surprised Neighbors didn't get around that, like you said, Olave, Henry, Etienne, Kyron Williams range, where you're just banking on the ceiling and hopefully Daniel Jones just figures it out and they score a little bit more than you think.
Hey, Giants gave us some preseason fireworks. I remember the Darren Waller one game where the entire drive went completely through him and his ADP jumped up 3, 4, 5 rounds.
You see it every preseason where it's just and then Darren Waller got hurt and was pretty much obsolete last year. I mean, it happens every year. I mean,
there's preseason is so guys. Hard. Yeah, there's every
year.
It's
so hard not to get caught up in the sauce. I mean, you see some of these blurbs that come out and you're just Josh Jacobs, plays in the Hall of Fame game. Everybody don't draft him. And most people didn't because of that. I mean, why would you? I mean, people that, draft a ton, you're like, man, Josh Jacobs, I mean, he's fallen, but still, why is he playing in this game? They're going to cut him. They're going to trade him. They're going to do this. And he goes out to be one of the best fantasy picks of the year. So,
and then on the other hand, Tank Dell, he actually showed up in preseason and, he wasn't that highly regarded coming out of college. There were definitely some size concerns. Yeah. And then he has fantastic preseason games, and the ones who bought it obviously reap the rewards. So it's hard to tell.
Injury at the end of the season really cost people probably a ton of money that got him at such a cheap price. I was a ton of Tank Dell last year, and when it really mattered at the end, when all the big money's up there, I mean, it was painful not having a guy that you got at such a great price. It's like the Kyron Williams Puka stuff. I mean, last year was a little bit different than some years, in my opinion, at least. that some of these guys that were free, like Nico Collins, and he started to get steamed up at the end, but Nico Collins tanked out, Kyron Williams, Puka, guys like that were pretty much double-digit draft picks were all massive, massive league winners.
Guys, that 4.10 George Kittle feels like a good value.
Yeah,
I agree.
I'm surprised that Ferguson still went above him. It's honestly interesting because now like the big Pearsall still has to go. That could be intriguing, but for the most part, all the people affected that we kind of know of by Aiyuk likely getting moved. Obviously, we don't know his landing spot, so we can't really adjust any Steelers, Browns, Patriots until we know the landing spot. But we do know that Debo should get a bump. Kittle could, but Debo stays right around ADP, at least over the last 3 days. Granted, last 3 days that's been baked in a bit that people have probably been adjusting. But Debo's been going at the 310. He goes at the 309. He's been going at the 402. He goes right around there at the 401. Justin, I'll start with you. Are you surprised that essentially, I'll get Kittle's ADP here in a second, but are you surprised that Debo didn't rise a bit more and Aiyuk is staying level on ADP? Granted that we know Aiyuk's, as we said, situations are likely worse than San Francisco and Debo should be in line for a greater target share?
I think it's tough. So, I mean, if you're drafting off rankings, no site has accounted for their rankings, updated their rankings for this trade. Or at least very, very minimally at the potential for it. And then if you're doing your own rankings, how much are you actually waiting whether this trade happens? And so I think people are kind of a lot more often thinking of like the doomsday scenario for, he's going to go to this team and that's going to be really bad for this player XYZ and maybe I'm going to fade them versus, the upside of when he leaves, it's going to help here, and here. And then there's also, I mean, if he does leave, but Amari Cooper joins, like how much of a difference does that one actually make? So I wouldn't say I'm that surprised on the Debo one, just again, because there's so many other exciting wide receivers around there. And to be honest, like with the current projections and the way that Aiyuk's on that team, Waddle, Evans, like these guys are going to have a lot more receptions than Debo. Debo is multifaceted, but like isn't thriving in the reception game in the current kind of system. Kittle is the one that definitely surprises me. Like going an entire round after Evan Ingram, knowing who George Kittle is, what his upside is, if there is no Aiyuk, that's the one that I think like I'm a little surprised.
Kittle, by the way, has been going at the 502 over the last 3 days.
So a little jump.
So he jumps up a bit, and one could assume that goes up probably even more. He probably gets closer, one would think, over the coming days, especially if the Aiyuk trade is finalized, that gets.
He's been all over. We've seen some third round George Kittle.
Kittle's had a very wide range of ADP.
Like he's definitely the weird mover out of this bunch right here. I mean, Pitts is pretty much. I'm surprised he's not going a little higher in this right now, just the hype that's surrounding him. But the Andrews, Ingram, Pitts, Kittle, Ferguson. Kittle's definitely the one that's like kind of all over the place. Ferguson's kind of stuck in that range where he's getting drafted. He moves to the 5th a little bit, but you're not seeing him anywhere near the 6th. I mean, after that, the tight end, especially with the premium, it makes things a little bit more tricky.
I'll say this about Kittle, and you guys are both big best ball players. Is Kittle's kind of week-to-week inconsistencies, knowing that he can have a great 8 grabs, 100 yards, 2 touchdowns, and follow that up with a 2-target game with 1 catch, scare people off in a managed format like the FantasyPros Championship is? Would you guys agree with that, or is that just me kind of talking out my ass? I don't know.
No,
just
I think that's fair.
Yeah,
I think that's
100% fair.
Yeah, we value him more because of his spike week potential in best ball. So, like, what do we value him more? The opposite. I mean, there's maybe more risk. I still personally think, like, even in a head-to-head style contest, like spike weeks from one of your few players helps you win a league. I mean, helps you win a week while getting a poor outcome, like, usually doesn't lose it for you as much. So I think there is still value. But yeah, I mean,
that's
fair.
Anytime you got to click a button, it's a little bit more risky. I mean, in best ball, you're just drafting a bunch most of the time. If you get Kittle, you're going to probably get 2. Maybe 3 other guys that are going to be on your team totally, depending on the rounds, whether it's 20 or 18, whatever the format is. So it's a little less risky because you still have the spike week that he's going to get, and especially if Aiyuk gets moved. When you're clicking a button, it just makes it a little more difficult because there's going to be weeks where Kittle's just blocking more, and McCaffrey takes over, and Kittle's not going to get you. He's going to get you 2 for 20 or 2 for 30, and owners can get frustrated and take him out of the lineup, and then boom. So that, I mean, you don't want to get caught on the boom. So, I mean, if you're drafting George Kittle in the 4th round, I mean, in this format, in pretty much any, clicking the button format where you actually got to, make the decision, he's going to be your tight end for a while. And I see no other reason besides that. I mean, to me, he's a guy that sometimes I overlook a little bit in redraft just because, again, the fear of, the injuries. And then obviously, like if it's a McCaffrey game and a game script, it's just not in your favor. Kittle might just get kind of washed away and that might hurt your team. But in best ball, definitely not a guy to forget.
I feel like every year in the FFPC, there's always trends that emerge. And last year, the most popular, maybe not trend, but just strategy you would see most common, everyone was trying to get the Kelsey Mahomes stack. It was just, I think it was 50% of drafts almost.
Ridiculous.
Burn people. This year, I mean, not the same idea with the stacking, but I think you're seeing a very consistent trend of multiple teams in drafts, especially as we get into August, are doubling up on that kind of more elite tight end range. Like I kind of, there is a cutoff a lot of people are feeling, and who knows, does Kittle maybe break into it and make it 8, but there seems to be a clear 7 from Sam Laporta to Kyle Pitts, and you're seeing multiple teams double up within those first 3 to early 4 rounds. So Justin, I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts? Obviously, FantasyPros Championship, a tight end premium format. Again, it's your draft, your strategy. So we as me and Terp say, we disagree with some strategies, but we never really truly knock them because people are putting up the money and you got to go with what you believe in. But what are your thoughts on this kind of more common strategy emerging of teams jumping on a 2 tight end build early on?
Yeah, to be fair, from a managed league perspective, I have not thought it through. So I definitely am not one to criticize, but I'd be curious where that kind of argument kind of comes from more in the managed style. I will say on the best ball side of things,
yeah, please.
Also, when it's not tight end premium, I'm pretty strongly against the bully or the 2 elite tight ends, because that second tight end you are paying when you're comparing against the other players are elite QBs, elite tight ends, really solid running backs, and you can only play one in your tight end position. The other one is moving into your flex, but now you're paying a substantial premium to get that one in your flex. So for me, like, I think sure there may be some scenarios where it helps your advance rate for like your individual like group, but come playoff time, you've already given up too much capital on a 1-week basis because you're paying a premium for that extra tight end when you're trying to use it in your flex spot, when you could be going for other positional players that their projections are substantially higher if you're talking just for the flex. But curious how you guys think that maybe differs with a managed structure, where I'm still expecting if you draft Kincaid and Andrews, you're starting them both each week, right?
Oh yeah, 100%.
Terp, is this, you're a grizzled FFPC veteran? What is this kind of obviously the tight end depth is greater than it has been in a long time. Have you seen something like this before? Is this kind of the first year experiencing this kind of push where you're seeing 10, 11, 12 even tight ends drafted sometimes within the first 5, 6 rounds?
I've always been a weight tight end type of guy. This is the first year where I'm kind of on the opposite side. I've built a bunch of teams with a bunch of different guys on these shows that kind of bully tight end. We even went 3 tight ends in one format just to see like what the structure looks like, because it is 20 rounds, so you get a little more wiggle room than some of the 18 round sites. So you can get away with, I think the one team we was Laporta, Pitts, and Njoku, and it was in the top 7 rounds. So it might looks like we reached a little bit for certain guys, but I feel like it separates in this format because like you said, it's deeper this year, but I think it has a drop off coming here soon. I think, after the Freiermuth, Goddard range, it kind of gets a little ugly. And yeah, you build a bunch and there's like other guys, the Hunter Henrys, the Conklins, the, Ben Sinat's a little later, guys like that present a little bit more, you can build 2 or 3 or 4 together to make sense. But I feel like you're going to gain a little bit of advantage. Like, it's just hard sometimes because you're looking at some of these guys who are going around them, like Kyle Pitts, I'll use for instance. I love Kyle Pitts. I've always been a Kyle Pitts the last couple of years hater. This year, I'm on board. Maybe I shouldn't be, but I feel like with Kirk Cousins, with the new offensive coordinator, it makes a ton of sense. But you're looking at the 2 guys who are being drafted around him. DK Metcalf, new offensive coordinator. I know they say they're going to run the ball, But offensive coordinators from Washington, they threw the ball a ton. If they can unlock Metcalf, move him around a little bit, it could be, a guy that I know I'm high on, and Devonta Smith, Justin talked about. If they put him on the slot, in the slot, game over. I mean, him or AJ Brown, if they could figure out a way to get in the slot. This is not that stale, ugly offense. I'm a diehard Eagles fan. We know that. If Devonta Smith gets in the slot, he could be the best value in fantasy football this year, with all things considered. Last year, he was getting drafted at the 2-3 turn, sometimes higher in spots. Now you're putting him, with Kellen Moore, with Hertz, who's having a really, really good camp, and then potentially putting him in the slot, moving him around, which they never did. If he gets in that slot, or A.J. Brown gets in that slot, you're talking about just monster numbers.
Yeah, and speaking of the Eagles, Jalen Hurts going 5.11. I don't know what his ADP in this is. I don't imagine it's substantially.
It's right around there.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
I was gonna say that.
It's the 504. But I think me and Surf do so many streams. We've seen him drop here more often than you would think.
He's made it to the 6th round before.
Yeah, it's weird. But then we've also seen people reach on him in like the early 4th. The QBs are all over the place, especially in
the difference between this year and last year is this year it's all about getting tight ends and moving them up. And quarterbacks who last year got steamed up so much. I mean, all these guys were getting drafted before the 7th round. Now you're getting, 6th round C.J. Stroud, 6th round Anthony Richardson, 6th round Lamar Jackson, and 5th round, Jalen Hurts, compared to last year where Jalen Hurts was in the 2nd round in some drafts. So it's a big drop off, and I feel like it's just too big of a drop off because Jalen Hurts, it's really hard not to say he's your QB1 this year, all things considered. I mean, Josh Allen, when we talk about Joe Brady and we talk about, Diggs gone and who's going to emerge from the outside. But with Hertz, new offensive coordinator, I just gave you the Eagles spiel. If they can figure out a way to unlock these guys in the slot and Barkley, get him a little bit involved in the passing game, this offense is way, way too undervalued at this point. All of them.
Yeah, Terp, nothing will get
except Barkley.
Terp, nothing will get our audience tuning out more than you proclaiming yourself. Everyone knows I'm a diehard Eagles fan. That's a quick way.
It's in the background. I try to keep it like non-biased, but I mean it's just hard sometimes. I mean, Kellen Moore, when they signed him after last year, trust me, I was on board. I was at almost every game last year, watching that disaster at the end of the season. After like that run AJ Brown had, I mean, he was on a historic run, and then the season it was just a disaster. But Kellen Moore,
the savior. Keeping on the Eagles, Justin, I want to ask you if we're looking at Team 9, who. Intriguing build. Especially in these managed formats, I find it interesting the teams that, first off, I'm really liking the build off the bat. But I want to ask you, you're in their shoes. This is going to be a twofold question. One is, would you have taken a Jalen Hurts to pair with Devonta Smith over a Tank Dell, knowing that you kind of already had 3, hopefully elite receivers in the bag, and then you turn around and get Rashee Rice? And then also, if you could maybe discuss a bit on top of that, what you consider the importance of stacking to be in a managed format. In comparison, obviously, best ball, it's become a very big strategy, and there's a heightened importance, less so in managed. But there are some people who kind of stand by it and manage it well. So I kind of want, it's a twofold question. If you can answer, if you're just in Team 9 shoes, are you taking Hurts there? And then kind of that overall thing. As Chase Brown continues to rise. Let's go. But answer that first, and we'll get to Chase Brown.
And that's what surprised me. Both teams 9 and 10. I expected both of them to take Jalen Hurts because AJ Brown with the next one. And when he fell both those, that's where I was like, wait, this is surprising because I already thought it was a little bit of a value based off like where I'm seeing Josh Allen and Mahomes go, but then the lack of the stacking. And so for me, I think it's, hey, for people who are listening and you're playing in your home league with your friends, stacking is not that important. Like, I think actually there still is some benefit because if you're making a bet on a team, like, that team's going to thrive together, you do well, but you only have to beat out one person in each individual week. It's usually head to head. Even the playoffs, you're only beating a few. But when you're in these managed leagues, but then they still have that big field that you have to compete against in the finals and the playoffs, that's where stacking still comes into play, because that's when we move from a traditional managed league where you only need to beat the league mates in your structure to now I want to win the FantasyPros Championship, or I want to win the main event. And you need that strong finish. That's where it's far more like a DFS contest. It's far more like a best ball contest, and the stacking is pivotal.
I'll say this, Team 9, As we're discussing it, though, getting Kyler Murray 2 rounds later than they would have had Hurts to get McBride, that's the way to do it.
Still taking Hurts, but he made up for it with Kyler.
But this is the same term. We had this same discussion on Sunday with a team. At some point, though, Team 9, your Warriors really like their receivers, like how they have the elite tight end of McBride, the stack with Murray. But at some point, those running backs are going to get real dicey, and you're going to have to hit fab and get the running backs who emerge in the season who no one drafted or hit on some late, because that's going to really hurt you, especially in this managed format, trying to set two running backs into your lineup each week. So going to be kind of intriguing to follow them there. Justin, just got to ask you where you stand, because this is a very, Terp, like of all the guys on the show.
Did you freeze? Looks like
I did freeze.
You're back.
Am I back?
It happens. You're back.
Weather's rough. I think a hurricane.
Weather's rough here too. So if I go out, I'm sorry in advance.
I was just saying we are a pro Chase Brown podcast more than
very pro.
So just his ADP is continuing. It was just I was looking at in June, his ADP was in the 10th round. July, it had moved up to the late 9th. Sunday was at 7-11. Now we see him go here at the 708. We said right behind Malik Neighbors and kind of all preseason hype guy so far. So just I want to hear your thoughts on just the Bengals backfield, and are you a Chase Brown believer like myself and Turp?
Yeah, so I think from a best ball standpoint, Chase Brown was one of my kind of 5 highest owned running backs. Very overweight on him when he was going around that in best ball was like around 120s and such. And I think it was just kind of a bet on an ambiguous backfield, on a strong offense, on a player that has the explosive aspect and could, as the incumbent, could take a larger role. And so you bring in Zach Moss, and obviously there's major, concerns with regards to Zach Moss is a much better pass blocker. Zach Moss had a better success rate running. Chase Brown literally was the worst in the league with success rate last year. And so there are kind of thorns that, say, hey, we understand there's some risk with Chase Brown. But if he gets that job, if, it works out, the upside is tremendous. And now we hear the drumbeat over the past couple weeks from the players, offensive linemen, saying Chase Brown's going to have the huge year. We see him playing with the ones. We hear the coaching staff, consistency. That's the key word there. He's more consistent, and that's what they're looking for in someone when they need to be able to trust the pass blocking, and then he's just going to run the assignment as the play is called. And so I think now he's going to be getting a lot more expensive. We're obviously going to see, we've started to see the Zach Moss, Chase Brown flippening and how high Chase Brown goes, 7-8. That's tough. When you're taking him over DeAndre Swift and Jalen Warren and Najee Harris, it's a lot. I think I'm probably willing to take him up to around that area, which in best ball stuff is in a lot of the, maybe mid 90s. But I'm not going to fault people. I love the explosiveness, but now that he's going so high, I do want to be more cognizant of, hey, there are still some risks here. There are still some, maybe his pass blocking, maybe his success rate at rushing, that we still need to be cognizant and not storm him completely over Dave Montgomery, James Conner, and so forth.
For our kind of weekly listeners, they've heard a lot of me and Terp's thoughts on some crowded or intriguing wide receiver rooms. So I'd love to get your thoughts on a couple. And the first one I wanted to mention is Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs, and Tank Dell. So in just this draft, it was Nico Collins goes at the 302, Diggs is at the 504, Tank Dell at the 509. We've seen them kind of flipped around. Obviously, Tank Dell has been consistently going as the last one, but we had drafts, especially when the trade first happened, where Diggs was super close to Collins, sometimes just ahead, but it solidified itself. You usually see it, Nico Collins somewhere in the 3rd, Diggs somewhere in the late 4th. Here he falls to the 5th, and then Tank Dell in the late 5th, sometimes early 6th. So I just want to hear your thoughts on that Texans wide receiver room and which one at their current price are you most liking?
I think Nico Collins is the true alpha. If you look at his yards per route run, if you see what he's developed last year, obviously mostly in Tank's absence, I think he is a true alpha, and he will remain that in the offense. I think this is a fantastic landing spot for Stephon Diggs. At this point in his career, having more of that underneath, having more of the kind of shorter A dot, I think that's going to work really well. And it's not going to draw the most difficult coverage. They're going to be able to find ways to kind of scheme him and let him do that kind of, hey, quick off the line skill set. And you then look at Tank Dell, and we absolutely love what we saw out of Tank Dell. I am concerned that if someone's going to get left out when all are healthy, just from a pure volume standpoint, it is tanked out. And that's just because I think Nico is the alpha and Stephon Diggs will have his own role in that more kind of underneath. And so this isn't a reason not to draft them, because to be honest, I'm happily drafting them all. I think they also have some of the best contingency value. If one of the three gets injured, then the other two just completely rise. And I think what Stroud did in his rookie year, he can even elevate off in the second year. I think they're going to be more throw heavy. If you look, their pass rate last year was not actually that high. They were still pretty happy to just let Motor Devin Singletary run it a bunch. But now that they have that more confidence in what Stroud, how he ended the season, I think this team is going to be clicking on all cylinders. I'm happy to have all three. But if I think the ADP that the market kind of has it of Nico, Diggs, and then Tank is probably accurate.
I believe one of our guests, Bradley Stalder, said it best is, I don't know which one you want to have, but I know I want to have one of them, which I think is an accurate way to say it. Another one of those rooms, this is the last one I'll ask you about, is the Bears. Obviously, DJ Moore is going first, and then you have Keenan Allen and the rookie top 10 pick this year's NFL draft, Rome Odunze. It's a complicated room because obviously Keenan Allen comes over from the Chargers, but they're just his age and his history, there's always an inherent injury risk. DJ Moore's coming off a brilliant season. Assumably is getting an upgrade in QB play, getting drafted in that 4-5 turn. And then you have the ultra talented Rome Odunze, who I think there is a split in the fantasy community with Shane Waldron. And is he a JSN from last year just repeated? Is this a guy who's going to assert himself as an alpha that he showed at Washington? He just goes at the 906 wide receiver 45. So just again, if you did a great job kind of talking through the Texans, similarly, if you could just kind of talk through your thoughts on the Bears wide receivers.
Yeah, I think it's a similar situation and probably one of the widest range of outcomes with Caleb Williams coming in there. And for me personally, I think Caleb is an absolute stud. I think he's probably the top QB prospect since Andrew Luck. And I don't think there's ever been a number one overall QB pick who is coming in with as great of weapons as he has. With the DJ, the Keenan, the Rome, even throw in Kmet, who's has a lot of strong metrics for a tight end. And so of that wide receiver group, I think Rome is a very different situation than JSN. First off, if we look at draft capital, JSN went a little later. I think it was pick 17 or so. I'm trying to go off the top of my head. It's been a while, but it was more of that kind of middle second half pick. Rome going in the top 10. Yeah. I think so. From a skill set, you have that. JSN also in the preseason had that injury, so got off to a slow start. When you get off to a slow start as a rookie, trying to get a connection, it's difficult. You then also have Geno Smith, who the previous year had played with DK Metcalf, had played with Tyler Lockett. And those are, that level of connection and rapport. When you then have a rookie who is kind of hurt, it's harder to really catch up, I would say. And then if you compare that to the Caleb situation, Caleb comes in with no rapport with anyone. So you may say DJ Moore's the alpha, signed the bigger contract, the best player on there. Maybe, but Caleb needs to make that new decision for himself. Keenan Allen, the veteran, maybe a little slower, maybe coming off had a great season last year, but obviously still aging. Maybe have more rapport with the Rome. So I think the range of outcomes for those three is a lot wider, just because we don't know what the favorite's going to be. We don't truly know what roles they are going to play. Who's going to come off in in 2 wide receiver sets? I think they go a whole ton of 3 wide receiver sets, but those are kind of the questions. But the way that I'm playing it is very similar to Houston, but actually leaning more into it because the prices are substantially cheaper. I can get Caleb. I love stacking Caleb, and then Rome falls. There were some pods ETR has been focusing a bit more on the redraft stuff as we get more in the home leagues. And seeing where Rome is on some of these websites where you're your home league, it's insane compared to where Austin the Best Ball and the FFPC streets have been drafting him.
Terp, a question for you in the chat. Akash is here in the chat. And he's saying he's drafting in 20 minutes. Should he get CD in the early first with current situation? So let's bounce it back to the first, because I do think CD's ADP has remained steady at the 101, 102, but the longer his holdout and contract situation drags on, there's a chance that some people could drop him down the boards. But let's reassure Akash. Are you still confidently drafting CD? That's all we needed to know. I think that's chat's telling him the same thing.
Is there a chance that it's Dallas and anything's possible? But Lamb is as good as you're going to get up there. Receiver wise. I think he's the safest and also presents the biggest, ceiling. Who else is there? If Prescott, they're not going to stop throwing the ball. You got Brandon Cooks, you got Jalen Tolbert. Yeah, they could add somebody, but I mean, CeeDee Lamb has, yes, he'll be back. They'll figure it out somehow.
Right. And I mean, obviously, Akash is talking about the contract situation, but if you look at the CBA, like players have no leverage in holding out games. Like what we saw with the Le'Veon Bell and things in the past, like that's not going to happen now because if you just don't play, if you don't play, you get fined. And you know what happens eventually? You lose your year of service. And that's what's most important on these players.
You saw what happened with Le'Veon Bell. Your career ended pretty much.
And so I think like they have no leverage. They're going to play. Take CeeDee happily at 2. Take him 1 if you want over McCaffrey.
Chad was also talking about Lamar Jackson and kind of the value that he presented in the mid-6, which is a little fall by almost half a round. He's been going kind of at the 5.12, so at that 5.6 turn. He goes at the 6.06 today, 2 team 7. What is the reasoning behind maybe Lamar's drop a bit in drafts this year? He's been kind of consistently going as QB 4, 5, sometimes even 6 in drafts. Justin, I'll start with you. Where are you valuing Lamar Jackson? Is the Derrick Henry edition worrying people? What is the thing there? Because, again, he seems as though he should be – offensive line is probably going to be a little bit diminished, but seems like he's still in a great fantasy situation. Again, is being reflected. He's drafted as a top 5 quarterback, but, I mean, this is Lamar Jackson, and people are getting him in the 6th round.
Yeah, I mean, he's still QB4, so obviously people are still bullish on him, but I think it comes down to – from a pure like rushing touchdown standpoint. In the past, we'd known that they were using him less around the goal line. They were using him less in the red zone from that rushing standpoint. And when you compare to Jalen Hurts, tush push, you compare to Josh Allen, has his rushing touchdowns. Like even if we get some regression from those guys, like you still have, that's a substantial amount of points that are coming from them. And just if we're splitting hairs, if we're going to have these QBs be ahead, I think that's a main reason why. For Lamar, not only did we have like the whispers of it and not whispers, like there were thoughts around it. Then we see last year, he doesn't have as much actual usage as a runner in the red zone. And then they bring in Derrick Henry. So now it's like, okay, full stamp on there. Lamar's not going to be their goal line back. You're not going to get that rushing TD equity. And so I think that's enough to differentiate what Jalen Hurts is only in this one, 6-7 picks ahead. I think that's fair. Now, the corollary to this is the second year in the Todd Monken offense. We saw in the second half for Baltimore when things started clicking, that air raid that has that kind of Lamar has the ability to still get it done in the air. Mark Andrews, sophomore year for Zay Flower, maybe Bateman, maybe Devontae Walker. We find like a third passing asset out of there. So I think that's just, we are splitting hairs and it's small things, but hey, if you're getting him as the 4th QB at 6.6, like I think you're still pretty happy.
Yeah, I think QBs this year, and then Turp mentioned it, are warped because you look at it and you're like, oh, value in the 6, like at the 6.6, as you said. But then it's, I mean, he's still QB4. It's just more, or sometimes it's because QBs are dropping. I will say, if that third receiver or receiving weapon emerges in Baltimore, put my money on Isaiah Likely over a Bateman or a Tez Walker. So that's going to be interesting. Turp, I got to ask you what Team 8 did. TJ Hawkinson in the 8th round, which we've kind of discussed, and then following up with Jordan Addison. For all we talked about how Rashee Rice is not going to get suspended, Jordan Addison, there's a lot of signs that his trial and sentencing is going to occur in the season, which usually is quickly followed by an NFL suspension. He's going to be missing, it's looking like. There's so many times we come up and say he's not going to get suspended. This is a long process. Next season, Addison's a guy where I feel confident in saying it seems like he's going to get suspended this year. What do you make of that strategy of doubling up on those Vikings who are almost guaranteed to miss some time this year?
Not something I'd recommend. I mean, Jordan Addison is a guy that I don't know if I clicked the button once this year. He's too expensive. You know, where is the ball going? Justin Jefferson. Justin Jefferson's going to get 1 million targets this year. The quarterback play is wildly uncertain. They could lean more into the run. Aaron Jones is going to catch some passes. Ty Chandler's going to catch some passes. It's going to be annoying enough. And when Hawkinson comes back, he's going to be the tight end 2 and the second probably option on the team. So to me, Jordan Addison is kind of just like you look at the guys around him. Am I ever clicking? I'm not the biggest Roman Dunze fan. Just for the situation we've talked about a bunch of times, I think it's going to be a little bit more like Seattle than it was, but I'm still clicking his number 100 times out of 100 over Jordan Addison. Curtis Samuel, 100 times over 100 over Jordan Addison. Keon Coleman, I'm not really the biggest fan, but still clicking his name over Jordan Addison. We can even go into the next round. DeAndre Hopkins, Brian Thomas, Cortland Sutton in some cases over Jordan Addison. I just don't see it. The suspension just makes it even worse. And for whatever reason, the suspension is not making him drop more. I mean, if you're talking about Jordan Addison, like 2 rounds later, maybe I could try to talk myself into it in some spots, just as, the upside that we saw at the end of the season last year. But that was, no Justin Jefferson and a team that was just terrible. Defense was terrible, and they're just throwing the ball around a ton. It's not a story I can tell in my brain, so I'm out.
I think there's a lot of good valid points there. One thing I'll just note from an ETR standpoint is as we've dug more into the suspension, we've kind of had about a 3 to 4 built-in suspension game risk. However, more recently, we've actually dropped that down to closer on the 1 to 2 because it does look like there's a possibility that 3-game suspension, which is kind of expected, will be next year. Now,
definitely
we don't know that. Obviously, don't know for sure. But just
I saw the court date. I think it's like October 3rd or October 6th or something like that. Not that matters, but it's definitely something. I think it's watch.
Yeah, and so that's why we're just trying to kind of bake this in because we're pretty confident it's not going to happen at the beginning of the season, which, to be honest, at least from a best ball perspective, and really managed to, we really wanted it, if anything, to be at the beginning of the season.
Yep.
Now that it's going to get projected later on, if it comes around playoffs, that's the worst case. So that's very bad. And if you think about it from a Jordan Addison and Vikings, they should want it this year. This is a rebuilding year. If anything, hey, put that suspension this year so when you come back, you don't have to worry about it during the offseason. But I think there is a little extra potential now that this might get pushed off to next year.
Very interesting point. Yeah, I love when fantasy Twitter tries to put their legal scholar hat on and try and figure all these things out. And you guys are the ones.
There's nothing better than fantasy Twitter, no matter what anybody says. You see all the different aspects of everybody, from the doctors to the the lawyers to the
they come out of the woodwork.
I can't do much the doctors, but shout out Drew Davenport. He does really good analysis, at least on these situations, the Rashid Rice, the Addison. So
he's one of the trustworthy ones. The doctors are work. It's iffy. Pro Football Doc for the most part. That's the guy, but then there's a lot of others we're seeing. They don't know what they're talking about.
Here's the difference. A lawyer is looking at the court cases. He's looking at the actual criminal
100%.
charges. He's looking the doctors are looking at a TV screen. If the doctor, and a lot of these, they're legitimate doctors, I'm sure, but if they actually were with the player and did an assessment, sure, you could provide something reasonable, but come on, just off what you're seeing on TV, okay.
You talked about Rice. That's a good segue. Obviously, suspension doesn't look like it's going to happen there. It's a crowded room in Kansas City. If you had a lean, they're all kind of going at a fair value, but Patrick Mahomes hasn't had this good of weapons in a really, really long time. So where do you stand when it comes to that room? And do you have a favorite and a guy that maybe you're not that high on?
So Rashid Rice is my highest drafted wide receiver right now on Underdog. And I'm just making a major bet that one of two things happens. Either he doesn't get suspended and then he's just an absolute smash, no question about it. Or if he does get suspended, I can build strong enough teams that I'm getting a low-owned, high-upside player into the playoffs, where even though if he hurts my advance rate, he's hurting everyone's advance rates. And come week 17, if I make a team there with him on it, then I'm getting a substantial edge because
he was a second-round pick before all this happened.
Exactly. And yes, sure, you have Xavier Worthy, so maybe he would have moved from a mid-second to a late second, early third or something. And okay, I buy that, but still, if we're getting him rounds 5 and 6 is where he's going right now, majority of the time, I'm willing personally to take that risk.
I think we were making the same argument on Sunday, and we've had guests who are kind of go on both sides, but I'm a big believer in this is, guys, you said it's going at the 2-3 turn. And again, Xavier Worthy was added after that and before Rashi kind of became a knucklehead and made knucklehead decisions. But this is a guy, a 3-round drop for essentially, I've seen a lot and people don't think he's going to get suspended. Again, what do they know? We'll see. But I think it's a good bet in that mid-6, and he's going to be one. I think someone said it on Twitter really well, where he's a guy who could break some of these contests, because at one point he was falling into that 9th, 10th turn. And
when he first came out, he was kind of in meltdown mode in drafts. People wouldn't even touch him.
Yep. So I was looking at his ADP chart today, and when the first tournaments came out, it started off and ADP was around 50s. And then quickly dropped. And you had about 3 to 4 weeks where he was in that kind of 80s or 90s. And so the drafts that happened there are obviously in substantial edge, but also the contest is large. That might be, now I'm guesstimating, 15% of contests that were in that, and the rest is kind of the upside down bell curve that we're seeing. Yeah, but like today, I also had one of the sharpest guys that I know in the industry on one of my podcasts on my stream, and he was like, "I'm actually not taking basically any Rashee Rice because there's strategic elements for why would you get him now when people have gotten him so cheap later on? I think he's going to get suspended. You have so many mouths to feed in Kansas City that he's not actually that second round value, and I think those are completely valid too. It's all about what your risk portfolio is and how you build the team around it."
Yeah, there are some guys who the fantasy community feels like every single person is on them or a believer. He's not one of them. Yeah.
He is definitely not one of them.
Rashi is one where I think there are legitimate arguments to be had for both sides. Justin, question kind of in the chat that I kind of want you to cover, just a general one. Our guy Kyle Trice asks, do all the studs in Detroit limit their ceiling? Something I can't seem to stop thinking about when I'm selecting Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jahmyr Gibbs, Laporta, who are all going within the first 20 picks of drafts. Some people in the chat are saying, they play most of their games in domes. They're one of the top teams in the league, high projected average total. They didn't add much competition, but I wanted to hear your thoughts on that question.
All right, so let's go 3 levels for this answer. The most simple level is, do all the studs in Detroit limit their ceiling? No. Now, how can we go a little further into it? If you actually break it down and look at the projections, you're actually taking a look at how many passes we're expecting, where those are going. That team, there's just a lot of volume, and it's a pretty efficient offense. They're going to be high-scoring games. And so would you rather have, 4 guys sharing the ball and they're putting up 28, 30 points, or 3 guys sharing it and they're putting up 23 points and such? And the way that those points are scored, I can just tell you, when we get down to the actual numbers, the projections, that team is going to score a lot. There's a lot of fantasy goodness. Now, who you didn't mention, and I think it's pretty interesting, and there's some validity, is you didn't mention Jameson Williams. Jameson Williams is probably, in my mind, the big question mark of, is there enough actually, is there too many mouths that Jameson Williams can't actually get fed? Because Jameson Williams may have the skill set that, he's maturing, but he's probably still going to be at best the 3rd, maybe 4th weapon in that offense. And how many targets is that worth? And how many deep targets is Jared Goff going to throw? I don't know. I think that's where it becomes kind of tricky. But from a St. Brown, from a Gibbs, from a Laporta, they're going to eat. They're going to get theirs. At least I'd say Amon-Ra and Laporta will. Gibbs, I think, is a little more of a question mark on how much you think he's going to take a larger role from David Montgomery.
Trip, I want to ask you, we mentioned Team 9. I do want to jump back into them and how they waited until the 8th round to take a running back. They go Brian Robinson, Jerome Ford, Charbonnet, Chuba Hubbard, and then they get Tyler Conklin here in the 12th. Of those running backs, do you think they did a good job? We always talk about when you're going to go kind of piss yellow and go in your first 6 rounds, you're taking 5 receivers and a tight end, and their tight end was Trey McBride. And then in the 7th, you stack McBride with Kyler Murray. Kind of got to take some dart throws at running back. Some people would, as we said, you maybe go for a little more, a high floor, low ceiling, just to kind of get yourself some safety. What are your thoughts on how they kind of built out their running back room?
I don't mind it. I mean, I like Brian Robinson. He's definitely one of my highest owned running backs this year. I just believe, Jaden Daniels, I believe in that offense with Kingsbury. I feel like Eckler is a little bit cooked, and I think Robinson is going to be the guy, especially in a format like this. It makes a ton of sense. Jerome Ford, you just don't know with Nick Chubb right now. If anybody can do it, it's him. But I feel like Jerome Ford at this spot on a team like this, you're going to at least get some serviceable weeks out of him right away. Foreman obviously got banged up in camp. It's a little bit of an unknown, but he's also a guy that, we all like as a player, but he just never seems to figure it out on a long-term basis when it comes to, a team that really wants to buy into him. Charbonnet, all the press this week is on, Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker is going to be a star. Kenneth Walker this, Kenneth Walker that. I haven't heard much from Zach Charbonnet. That might not mean anything, but, coach speak is something that you try to listen to what the actual guys are saying. And it seems like Kenneth Walker is a guy that, just based off the preseason and word, that might be underdrafted right now. So Charbonnet is definitely a guy that I think has a chance, but probably not my favorite, upside backup. And then Hubbard's, it's so hard because I'm on the Hubbard side. And I don't mean I'm against Jonathan Brooks, because Jonathan Brooks is a guy that we want to hold at the end of the season because he's a guy that's going to win you $1 million. If you can figure out a way to get there, he's a guy that you'd want on your team. But I just have a little bit more questions than some, and I'm going to own both. I'm not going to, fading Brooks, and especially where did he go in this draft?
Jonathan Brooks went at the 8-11, which is
the 8-11.
continuing
I'll
a
take
free
him.
fall for him.
He's in free fall mode right now, and I like that personally because I didn't have that much of him in the 7th round. When he was sneaking up in the 6th round when there was no
late 6th, a lot lately.
That was too rich for me. But if you're giving me Jonathan Brooks in the 8th round, the 9th round, and I'm starting with a really good running back to start off, whether it's one of the guys in the top couple rounds, I'm fine with taking Brooks. But Hubbard, I feel like will give you some serviceable weeks to start off. Miles Sanders is a forgotten man. I don't think there's any way that he's going to eat into that timeshare. I think Hubbard's going to get you a couple weeks. Let's just say he gets you 5-6 weeks. That could be very, very important in a redraft league. And if you can figure out a way to draft both, they're both cheap enough to where it makes sense. Where Hubbard's going to be the guy early on, and then when Brooks starts getting the engines going, he's a guy that when it comes down to these sprints to win all this money and all these contests, that might be the one you have to have.
Let's stick on that, Justin. I'm going to ask you. Let's start with Brooks, but 2 rookies who kind of came into the league with some injury concerns. Obviously, Jonathan Brooks, torn ACL, Ladd McConkey, a litany of injuries at Georgia. Brooks was going in that 6th, 7th turn before the news broke that he probably isn't going to be active until week 3 or 4. He went at the 8:02 in our main event on Sunday. He falls to the 8:11 today. Who knows how far his drop's going to be? And then Ladd McConkey was going kind of in that mid-7th all the way he's down to the 8:02. So if you could kind of give me your thoughts on Brooks first and then McConkey and your thoughts on their respective injuries and maybe based on your projections and the work you've done, have you guys bracketed missed time for them into the projections? And are these guys going maybe too low? Have we over-adjusted for their injuries?
Yeah, and I think let's start with the running back position. I think it's important to kind of take a high-level idea here. And, Dave is kind of referencing this with the Charbonnet, but there is a difference from a strategic aspect of these running backs, especially this late in this part where we're drafting for best ball and we're drafting for redraft. Because in best ball, when I'm comparing someone like Zach Charbonnet to Ty Chandler, kind of what, I'm closely getting to where I'd rather have Ty Chandler. And because Ty Chandler, we still expect to have a whirl on an everyday basis. He's going to find some touchdowns. In redraft, I'm not going to be starting Ty Chandler that often. So even if he gets those touchdowns, it's not really kind of showing up on my lineup as it is in best ball, where someone like Zach Charbonnet, I agree that drumbeat is all right now about Kenneth Walker. But if Kenneth Walker goes down, Charbonnet moves into a top 10 running back.
Sure,
and we know he can get that volume. And so in a redraft style, I like Zach Charbonnet better because if Aaron Jones went down, Ty Chandler can definitely move up, but I wouldn't put him as a top 10 because Minnesota offense isn't as strong. He's, had a couple workhorse, but it's a little questionable. So just thinking through, there's a strategy aspect to running backs. And I think when we get to Jonathan Brooks, it's kind of similarly where okay, I'm going to have pretty high confidence of when I know I need to start Jonathan Brooks. And in the early games, if you can find hey, other starters that I'm going with, awesome, you go with it. But when Jonathan Brooks takes over that role, whenever it is, that's huge. Now, price tag of where we're looking at Jonathan Brooks, the 6-7 turn, I think that's insane. And I'm not, would not have been drafting him earlier because there's not that much more information we've gotten now than we knew before. We knew he was going to start on the, the off-season pup, which really doesn't mean anything. We still don't know if he's going to start in the regular season pup or miss many games. It sounds like based off that coach speak, they're hoping he's back week 3, week 4 and start up kind of slow. So we've built in a couple games of kind of buffer from the miss, but I think there's also going to be a slower ramp up. The real bet on Jonathan Brooks is kind of more like a bet on Dave Canales. It's, do you believe that this Carolina team is going to surpass their market expectations? Because right now they're a bottom 2 expected offense in the league based off the market. And so you kind of have to hit a parlay of, okay, do the Panthers actually exceed their market expectations? And can we get some touchdowns on the ground from Jonathan Brooks? And also, does Jonathan Brooks come in at a decent time in the season, take that strong role? Chuba really moves to kind of a 30% at most type player. That's what you really need for the Jonathan Brooks thesis to play out. It's very possible, and he can be the guy you need come the sprint. And that's where he's most likely to excel. But there's a price you're paying. And so when I look at who else is available at that time, like I'd probably rather have a lot of the other running backs that are going around where he is.
Just a quick question in the chat from Rubio, who missed the first part of the show, and for anyone who's tuning in kind of in the middle of our draft here. We did discuss essentially the first couple rounds, the first probably 10 minutes, 15 minutes of the show were spent kind of discussing Brandon Aiyuk and really kind of the 49ers overall. So if you missed that when we wrap up here, please go watch it back. And we kind of covered all things Aiyuk and the 3 possible landing spots that are rumored right now. Of all the Niners, obviously, we kind of mentioned Kittle stayed a little jump. Aiyuk stayed in kind of the early 4th. Debo stayed in his ADP. But Ricky Pearsall goes from drafted in the mid-16th to the 12-12 here. So I did just want to point that out that he sees almost a 3-round jump, closing in on a 4-round jump after the Brandon Aiyuk news that Brandon Aiyuk is likely not going to be a San Francisco 49er. Justin, looking at the 10th round, guy who I feel like I've seen a lot of negativity towards, and there are a lot of underlying college stats that don't maybe pose aren't a great sign, I should say, for NFL success, is Brian Thomas here. He goes as wide receiver 50 at the 1009. A top 20 pick in the draft, I believe, or just right outside of it by the Jaguars. Had a really great year at LSU, was obviously overshadowed by Malik Neighbors and his brilliance, but Thomas had a great year on his own. But it was also really the only year that he truly showed out in college, which obviously you see kind of a trend of receivers, first-round receivers specifically, with only kind of a 1-year breakout in college, don't have the best track record. So I wanted to hear your kind of thoughts on Brian Thomas and his kind of upside, because that is by some an offense that people are expecting to bounce back with Trevor Lawrence and be much improved this year. And Thomas should be primed, I think. So I'll just say this, and I'll stop my rambling, is for a first-round receiver and a kind of an exciting young offense, he's not getting nearly as much hype as you would expect going in the 10th round here. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts. If you were in agreement on Thomas possibly struggling, or are you kind of a believer at the price point?
So if we look at Brian Thomas from a draft prospect, there's definitely some holes in his, and a lot of it has to do with small sample size. It has to do with playing next to a complete target hog and Neighbors. And so like there's some question marks, but overall, he's still prospect out as the number 4 wide receiver, but the majority of kind of the analysts, the experts out there. Then draft happens, and his draft capital, he goes 23rd overall, the fourth wide receiver in a very strong class off the board. So like, okay, we see some strengths in college tape. The teams agree he goes with that level of draft capital. Now, we look at the role that he's going. He's jumping into Jacksonville, which we expect that to have that kind of strong upward trajectory. As you said, positive regression coming for Trevor Lawrence this year. And when we look at the kind of offense, like, is there an argument that he could eventually become the alpha in that offense? Like, yes, you have Christian Kirk right now, who's going to be kind of your primary ball target hog, but like, he still isn't going to play like your true alpha role if, Thomas can actually, progress into that. I think why there hasn't been much like kind of momentum on him as we've seen elsewhere is, I don't know if it's the Jags camp, I don't know if it's the beat reporters, but like, has anyone heard a single thing about Brian Thomas out of camp? Like, not at all. There's no highlights. There's no nothing. Are we believing that he's never caught a ball? No,
That's
probably
great.
not. But like, right. And so I think the only thing is like maybe there's one report that's saying like they're expecting him to be the number 4 target in that offense, which is behind Kirk, Ingram, Gabe Davis. Sure, complete makes sense. He's a rookie, but he's going to be on the field day one. He has the opportunity to excel, and we've seen a lot of things, both from his draft prospect, both in his draft capital, to declare that like he could actually emerge as a true alpha. So I'm buying a lot of Brian Thomas, and from a best ball, and I guess in managed leagues too, I like stacking him with Trevor Lawrence too, because I think those two very similar to kind of Caleb Odunze. They also have that contingency upside where with one injury in that offense, these players have the ability to really excel into that kind of next tier, where when you look at wide receivers going around him, Cortland Sutton, what could happen for Cortland Sutton to substantially be more valuable than his current role? Like, there's no injury that could happen. It would just have to be like Bo Nix, and the offense is absolutely amazing, but like, it's not very likely. So that's where I like to have building that contingency kind of upside value.
Terp, I got to ask you, and Justin, I want to hear your response after, because I believe, Justin, you had mentioned some positivity for DeAndre Swift, which is a rarity these days. But Terp, you're not a DeAndre Swift guy. My question is for you then, Is there a guy out of Roshan Johnson or Khalil Herbert, both of who just went in the 14th round, that you're drafting who you think would usurp Swift? Or is this just kind of a dead zone, a complete no man's land? You're not really touching any of them.
I wouldn't say I'm totally off Swift. And he has to be the right price. I mean, it all depends on the build with him. He's not a guy that I'm like going to pound the table for. I love the talent. I loved him last year in Philly. They didn't use him right. You know, there's talks that he just doesn't, him and the coaching staff doesn't gel everywhere he goes. I mean, everybody liked him when he was in Detroit. He was the darling of fantasy football drafts. He was a first-round pick, I'm pretty sure, in most drafts for a really long
1-2 turn.
Pretty much a 1-2 good turn. It was a lock. I look back to the draft that me and Theo from Player Profiler did on stream, and we took him in the first round. And it was like, it seemed like it was too easy at the point. But since then, he just hasn't figured it out. Like, pass protection, not very good. So, you know, we all know he has receiving ability, and we all know that they targeted him early in the preseason, but we also know that those other two guys are there. And if they don't move any of them, I think they're going to be an annoyance enough to limit his upside. So if there's one I had to pick, it would probably be Roshan Johnson. He just is a better profile to me overall. It's definitely a backfield that they're pretty much free right now. So I'm trying to add one or the other. Hopefully the other guy gets traded to a better spot, like possibly Chargers, possibly Dallas situation that, some of these guys that are kind of in flux right now get traded. But I'm not saying I'm totally out on Swift, but like, I just don't know what's going to change from all the other spots that have been much better fantasy spots. And you would think he's going to turn into a 60-70% guy. I don't see it, but I'll have some, but definitely not be overweight.
I mean, it's also, you mentioned it's pure speculation, but there's
I also don't trust the coaching staff, to be honest with you. I mean, I wish that they started over so bad with a fresh mind, with a fresh OC, new coaching staff with that team. I like Caleb Williams. I like Jaden Daniels a little bit more. People say I'm a hater on Roma Dudze. I'm not a hater on. I love the talent, love the profile, love the draft capital, love all that stuff. I just don't know if there's enough balls to get around, And then you just know the rookie quarterback's going to struggle a little bit. But the coaching staff is the thing that worries me the most. I don't trust Shane Waldron. I don't think he's at all good at his job. I think they could have hired a bunch of other guys that would have made a lot more sense. And just the head coach, we've seen it. I mean, I'm not the Justin Fields. Is he really that good? No. But they just, last year watching that was just so painful. That offense was just a disaster from top to bottom. So the coaching staff worries me more than anything. I just think that could be a little bit more of a running back by committee type of situation. And, I'll have some of Swift, just hoping on that upside. But, I'll mix in all those guys. But Roshan Johnson will be the guy that I probably would pick.
Yeah, and you mentioned it there. There's just pure speculation, but these people are saying, well, if something happens in Dallas or LA or any team that loses a running back, that Chicago may be their first call. But Justin, I believe you mentioned how at least Swift is a guy that you would, I forget what the conversation, but I believe you had said, oh, you like him in that range. But can you just give me your overall thoughts on kind of the Chicago's backfield and who you're taking?
Yes, I think Swift is really tough because if you do it from a purely projection standpoint, like you have an ETR, we have him as usually a decent value compared to ADP because he's going to play a major role in that passing game. And you look at, how much they committed to him from a contract standpoint, the way that they're kind of planning on using him should still be like a early down, but also kind of the weapon. We're also making a major bet that, hey, Chicago is going to be a pretty strong offense. So, like, there's lots to like about him if things go well. I am also, though, very much in the camp that, like, I think Khalil Herbert is probably a better pure rusher. And I think there's more risk in his there's more risk in his profile because of this, the Roshan, because of the Herbert behind him, that I'd like to make me really want to draft him that much. And so, like, if Khalil Herbert becomes the every down or in like the early down back, and then Swift is more just used as the weapon, there was one of the, I think it was Eberflus who was doing one of his interviews, and they specifically called Swift like he's going to be a great weapon for us and even can play on first and second down. And like that specific word, just that one word, even, it implies in my mind like this risk of, does that mean they literally brought him in to be primarily more of like the pass catching third down back and then even mix in some early stuff? that would be absurd with how much they spent on him to bring him in and made him a priority. I think he was the first running back or first major running back signed. Yeah. So like you could tell he was that priority. But like that combined with how good of a rusher Khalil Herbert is, it still gives me some pause. So he's someone that I'm a little overweight on because I still want to trust the projections. And I like stacking him with Caleb Williams because I do believe he's going to play that pass catching role, but not someone that I'm just hammering. And to be fair, I'm more overweight Khalil Herbert because I think Khalil Herbert is just a great value late in drafts. And I can kind of just take them both.
Justin, I don't know how much of a believer you're in. I know there's I wouldn't say it's a philosophy, but there's some people who kind of try to attack him or not. But this idea of like the running back dead zone, and every year that's kind of that range changes. So I want to ask you, in this year, where do you kind of see that running back dead zone beginning? And are there any names in that dead zone specifically that you're targeting or you think are likely to emerge out of it and be a really productive fantasy piece?
Yeah, Jack Miller on the ETR team wrote an article recently calling it the death of the dead zone, the death of the RB dead zone. And I think it's a combination of the market just becoming a lot sharper around what risks are baked into these, because you have a guy like Zamir White, who a couple of years ago probably would have been a stereotypical, maybe end of the third, early fourth dead zone back, someone where we can give him a ton of projectable volume. We can see the role, but we're not accounting for the risk that Dylan Laub actually plays far more of that third down role, that Alexander Madison maybe takes 30%, 25% of the rushes. And now you've got a early down running back that's not catching passes and team's not scoring that many touchdowns. But in the 7.11 8th round, that's okay. When we were going in the 4th round, that's where it was the dead zone. So I'm more of the opinion that this year, the dead zone kind of has disappeared, because the ones who are going in where it traditionally was, those are guys who honestly were like third rounders before. I mean, Joe Mixon, he's going in what, 5th round of a lot of drafts right now. And there's no chance in any other previous year that he wouldn't have been going more in that third, when
no chance.
You're on the Houston Texans, a blossoming team. The only person behind you is Damian Pierce, who's the team has basically said they hate. Granted, I like Damian Pierce this year, but I'm just, talking out loud. And then, yeah, sure, he's losing some efficiency, but he's still going to have double-digit touchdowns. Like, that type of argument usually gets someone into the third round. But we've wisened up and said, you know what? There's actually some unknown, black swan risk here, and therefore he should actually go 5th round, 6th round.
It's a really interesting point. I kind of also, another thing that you see year over year, and is especially important with FFPC, is kind of those tight ends who emerge. Like, I forget the exact stat, but I bring it up all the time, where it's every year there's a tight end who's drafted outside of, I believe, the top 20, who winds up being a top 5, 10 down. Yeah. Like every year, like clockwork. Me and Terp have discussed various names, and I like asking a lot of our guests, is there any name that sticks out to you who could be that guy this year?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely love that, because historically I'm a late tight end drafter. I think it was 3 years ago, 3 of the top 6 tight ends were outside like the top 25. I think it was Dawson Knox with the Bills. You had Dalton Schultz breaking out with the Cowboys. You had Gronk with the Bucs, high priority offense. Then the next year, I think it happened again, and it was 3 out of the top 6 again. And that was where the Taysom won. And, last year we did it again with Laporta and such. So usually, exactly. And so usually I love these late ones, but gosh, it feels so ugly this year. And so
very ugly.
A lot of what I've been doing is trying to draft one of the top 10 and then draft 2 at the very end, depending on the format, if there's 20 rounds or such, because I do like some of these kind of late last round tight ends that are showing up right now, especially from a game theory aspect, where you've got guys like Theo Johnson, who's only been drafted in, I think, 11% of drafts. And so if you can get a unique unowned player like that late in the draft, and he's showing that he's likely going to be the tight end one, he's playing ahead of Bellinger. You got Colby Parkinson, who Rams, we know that they like to use one tight end. They don't want to take him off the field. It doesn't matter how bad Tyler Higbee was. If he's just going to fall down after catching it, they still kept him on the field. And in one game, I think he had 17 targets or something crazy. Like, that's how the Rams play. That's likely going to be Colby Parkinson. Who knows when Tyler Higbee gets back? Greg Dulcich. I mean, we know that the Broncos, they want a pass-catching tight end. He's not going to be in the field every play. They're still going to have their other blocking tight ends, but they've been saying they want a tight end weapon. And so if Dulcich can stay healthy, I love him as well. I think there's a lot of those late ones, but they're so thin that, like, I think kind of this year, I want to get one of those top 10, and then I'm happy to pair another one or two of those really late ones for upside.
Yeah, it's definitely uglier, but I go back and forth because I'm like, am I doing revisionist history? Did I feel like it was ugly last year, like in the years before that? But there are definitely some more enticing names. I think me and Turpa said, you mentioned Tyler Conklin. I've mentioned Johnny Smith. I think the most likely one
was more of like a best ball type of situation. I mean, I don't know. Tyler Conklin.
No. Don't walk back your Tyler Conklin love. Don't do it.
I mean, most of the drafts I do are best ball, but when I'm getting these main event drafts, I'm in the same mentality. I've been drafting these. I mean, to me, it cuts off after Freiermuth. I mean, Hawkinson's not a guy I'm going to target a ton. I think that's just a little bit more of a worry that I'm willing to take. But after Freiermuth, I mean, Komet, ugly. Schultz, ugly. Isaiah Likely, love him, but I mean, Andrews is still there. And unless he gets hurt, you're betting on, look at some of the guys that are being drafted around him. I like Luke Musgrave, but, Tucker Kraft's still going to be there and be annoying. And they have 100 receivers that all have plenty of talent. I mean, Hunter Henry, he's a guy that if I'm going to start, I'm fine with that. I mean, he's a guy that, was pretty solid last year. He could be the number one target guy on the team until the rookies emerge. Tyler Conklin, we talked about. I mean, look at some of these names. They're just like Ben Sinnott. It's going to take a while. He could be a league winner, but he's going to take a while. Kate Otten, I like him. I like the profile, but I mean, with Jalen McMillan emerging, Godwin getting in the slot, that's going to mess up Otten. And then Mike Evans ain't going anywhere. Johnny Smith, Dolphins hate tight ends, but I really do like Johnny Smith this year. I feel like he's going to, pay off where he's being drafted. Mike Gesicki, I've always loved Mike Gesicki. If there's a team that I could place Mike Gesicki on, it would be Cincinnati. But, are they going to figure out a way to target him more?
I see Paul's comment on here. I feel like this is the classic, hey, let's just name a whole bunch of football players. We just go through all the tight ends. But it's 100% true. Like, they all have really
Everybody loves Noah Fant this year. It's like,
well, he got hurt. He just got, that happened in the past hour or two. The news came out.
So he got hurt. So that's the first problem. But the second problem is look at all the guys. I mean, they're all not. And they're supposed to be a running football team. We all like Fant's profile, but like, what's changed from last year or the year before? Like, I don't know.
I think so. And you were talking about like, am I putting blinders on because is this just the same thing like in the past? But I think there is a clear difference, particularly from like a youth standpoint of like last year and this year. Like, last year, we had a lot of exciting youth guys where Laporta as the rookie, and we saw that happen pretty quickly. Trey McBride, sophomore season, we knew he had the profile, and now he was going to get the opportunity. Jake Ferguson, again, sophomore season, and going to have that kind of more clear line of sight on the Cowboys on a strong team as well. So for me, and what we've seen historically in the data, where the way that tight ends break out, late tight ends, is either they have the talent themselves to really do it, and that's usually after yards after catch. It's the kind of profile, or they're attached to a very strong offense. And that's why I mentioned the breakouts for that 3 years ago, the Gronk, the Knox, the Schultz. Like, Gronk obviously has his talent, but he was all, but like the Knox and Schultz, not huge talents, but those are really high-powered passing offenses. Who do we have that's a late tight end this year that has that? And that's where I'm trying to think through, like, okay, Dulcich is the Broncos, not the great offense, but like maybe he has the talent. We think we has that prospect profile.
2 years ago, we thought he had the talent. It's still there. He just couldn't stay healthy.
Theo Johnson, one of the top, RAS scores, combines that we've ever seen out of tight ends. Like, maybe that's what elevates him. This is what I'm trying to, when you're trying to figure out who that tight end is, trying to figure out. And Johnny Smith, you mentioned, maybe that's actually a little of both. A yards after catch monster on a really strong offense.
Yeah, Theo Johnson also. I mean, Drew Aller at Penn State, just it wasn't priming anyone for statistical success. Excuse me. I do think it's also interesting. Like, there's so many of these guys where it's just like the meme format where it's like, it didn't work for them, but maybe it will work for us. There's just so many names where we're on like round 3 or 4. And it's like, all right, let's just give it another go. I will say the cheat code answer is Isaiah Likely. If something happens to Mark Andrews, he probably does wind up at least as a top 7.
That's definitely the one. It's just hard, where he's being drafted to click some of the names that are around him.
Because if Mark Andrews is healthy, you're just not returning your value there, even in the 12th round.
No.
But no, it's definitely an interesting thing to try and figure out if the trend continues or if this year it seems like a year where maybe it finally does break. But we'll find out soon enough. Let's go to Team 2 real quick. Justin, I'll ask you. Me and Terp talked about it a bit on Sunday, but obviously Christian McCaffrey, we saw with a little injury hiccup today, falls to the 102, which isn't too dramatic, but you see maybe some slight slippage, injury concerns. And Team 2 handcuffs him with Jordan Mason. Elijah Mitchell still going into the 13th round, but Jordan Mason's been getting all the positive buzz. And Elijah Mitchell has kind of seen there and done that. So are you a believer in this kind of managed format of handcuffing Christian McCaffrey, first of all, like Team 2 did? And then if you're looking at it, are you looking to take Mason or Elijah Mitchell?
Yeah, I think handcuffing an elite running back is a really challenging. It isn't probably your optimal way to play it, but I think when you don't even know who the true backup is, that really becomes an issue in my mind. Where if you wanted Breece Hall and now we've got increased confidence that Braylon Allen is the number 2 there, I'm okay with that. Like, I think there's arguments for, hey, he misses a game or two and you get that upside. It raises your floor. Come, the sprint, come the playoffs, that's where it hurts you a bunch. Where we've seen from a best ball stance, where the handcuffs work out best, and it's less of handcuffs and more of just ambiguous backfields, and you draft both because either of them can have spike weeks, they can alternate and kind of who has success. So in this managed leagues, I am, more open to like, hey, if you really want to have that handcuff to raise your floor to advance kind of to that playoff aspects, but I want to make sure I'm doing it in a situation where I know who the true handcuff is. And I don't think that's the case with the Mason Mitchell. I think most likely if McCaffrey misses a game, they would split the work.
Terp, it is tough. A guy that you and me were both very high on last year. We're high on this year, but maybe it's just not going to happen for him. Kendre Miller is hurt again. He's going in the 17th round. Should we just give up, or are we holding? Or are we holding on to our stocks there at Kendre Miller, despite them just sinking further and further down? Where are we at on Kendre Miller?
It's such a tough spot right now. I love the player. I love the situation. I hate the team. Might be if I had a pick, I've said this before, the team that I hate drafting players the most on this year. I mean, what's really exciting about the Saints? Taysom Hill listed as a quarterback on some sites doesn't help anybody. Tight end, Juwan Johnson, I liked him. Then he got hurt. Seems to be a good value, especially in this draft. But like the receiving position, Olave is kind of like a quiet name right now. He's not a name that anybody's rushing to draft. And then the second receiver, I'm a Shaheed guy. If I had a pick, he'd be my guy. He's definitely a guy that I've been targeting in best ball. But besides that, like Alvin Kamara, not really. It's just, and the coaching staff is just Dennis Allen. Every time I listen to him speak, my ears bleed. So, when it comes to Kendre Miller, he came out and criticized them. Could it be just a guy trying to motivate a player? Yeah, but this coaching staff just seems a little different to me. And they don't seem like, even if Kendre Miller is on the field, they're ever going to give him that full-time work that we covet. And he's fell down draft boards to where he still has a chance to, take a shot. You're taking a lottery tickets type of situation. You can cut him. But it's hard to get behind, a team that kind of doesn't seem like they believe in him much.
I think that's the best argument, what you just mentioned at the end there for this type of league is you can cut them. And in best ball, like guys like Kendre Miller, Jordan Mason, they're just really high risk because there's a decent chance they give you zeros all year. But in this structure, you're going to know very quickly whether Kendre Miller makes the team. You'll probably know pretty quickly whether or not he has like the number 2 or any role in that offense. And I think same thing with Jordan Mason as well. And like, hey, you drafted McCaffrey, maybe McCaffrey misses a week or so and you've got that Mason. And then if it doesn't work out, you can drop him. So I think that was definitely the best argument for drafting running backs this late is you'll know pretty quickly someone like Kendre Miller, whether or not he actually has the role you're looking for.
Justin, first off, for those who are, as I say, tune in weekly, I ask this question a lot, especially in these last 3 rounds, where the draft is on the tail end, but I do always find it to be an interesting question. And I like when we have our guests on because each guest gives a different answer. And for the first time, we can actually highlight defense and special teams. And over at ETR, you guys have some of the most renowned analytical projections in the business. So I just wanted to ask you, over with what you guys are doing, are you guys mocking or projecting the impact that the new kickoff return has on fantasy, or is that just kind of like a wait and see, and will it have any impact? Because I think there's some people are like, I think teams are just gonna choose, as you said, with game theory and all that, they're just gonna kick it out of the end zone each time. But is there any fantasy impact there in your guys' models?
So for the Scott Fish Bowl, kickoff return yards were extremely important, to the point that someone like Rashid Shaheed could become a top 20 wide receiver just because of projected return yards. I think it was 10 return yards is a point or something like silly, maybe 10 or 20. I don't know, something silly.
Yeah.
And so we went through the exercise of trying to actually project, and it was a lot of, put it up in the wind because on Tampa, who's going to be doing the return? Well, Bucky Irving, when he was in college for Oregon, he actually did a decent amount of returning, but like there's no reports on who's going to do it here. Then you've got some of the coaches that are like, even the interviews about the kickoff are saying like, oh, we're excited for this. Like, keep an eye out, but like no one wants to reveal what their actual plans are. We saw this, almost like a squib type kick in the first Thursday night Hall of Fame game. So I would say from a offensive projections, I don't think we're baking anything in, because the only upside from a fantasy perspective, unless you do return yards, is for touchdowns. Mm-hmm. And those are just so outlier events that like not going to bake that in. Maybe after, okay. Yeah, here it was. Thank you. Every 5 yards was a point for kickoff returns. Like, yeah. And then, but like maybe as the season goes on, if it does, maybe we should start accounting for that in the DFS, like the weekly projections. But I think you've got to take a bit more like, there's been some analysis out of the Underdog crew with regards to the impact of like learning from the extra, not the kickoffs in the XFL and seeing what's going to happen. But like, yeah, a lot of it has to be wait and see.
Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, some of the dumbest stuff out of it. I mean, Turp, at one point, you and me here, when like we first started considering this, it was like, maybe Tyreek will return for the Dolphins. What?
There's just no way these guys are putting these players out there. I mean, Jalen Wright might be a guy they put out there, but you're not seeing Tyreek Hill and guys like that.
It was fun while it lasted for that brief 2 minutes when we were discussing it before the chat was like, yeah, that's not going to happen. And we were like, yeah, that's not going to happen.
Real quick, Adam Scheffler just reported the Patriots are out of the Brandon Aiyuk sweepstakes.
It's the Steelers. It's happening.
Got to be the Steelers.
I just hope you're wrong. I just really do. I have a lot of Freiermuth and not a lot of Pickens, so that doesn't really hurt. But I think all that talent with Arthur Smith just gives me anxiety. It's going to keep me up.
Cleveland just doesn't make sense. Like the Amari and
Mara says the Patriots were, sorry for cutting you off, they were saying the Patriots were willing to offer the most money per year, offering north of $30 million per season, but Aiyuk did not want to go there.
Just stay in San Francisco. Get your brain together.
Which means he has a deal with Pittsburgh that might be a little less, but he's happy.
Why does he want to go to Pittsburgh? Like, am I missing the connection? Like, Washington, obviously, Jaden Daniels is a guy played together in college, which is, by the way, still the most absurd thing to me when I see the highlights of them at Arizona State. Because, like, what simulation are we in where Brandon Aiyuk and Jaden Daniels were in college together? But that's neither here nor there. But the Steelers one obviously has been rumored for a bit. It could be a Tomlin thing. Players love playing for him, and I get that.
But the quarterback, and like he clearly you would think he watches sports. I mean, he watched what Atlanta did last year with Drake London. What makes them think that they're going to unlock him? When they couldn't unlock, not that Drake. I think Drake London's a better prospect, but they couldn't figure that out. And the quarterback is Russ, who I like this year, but is he even going to start? And I've always been a Justin Fields guy, but throwing accuracy is not his forte. Pickens is there. Freiermuth is there. I don't get that move whatsoever. I mean, they might be just trying to move all in when they have a cheap quarterback right now. But
I mean, in theory, if Russ or Fields don't work out, which more than likely they're going to be investing in a quarterback, so they're going to have a cheap quarterback for a bit. Is Justin just?
But they'll be a good enough team that it won't really matter. That's like the Steelers are going to be
500 no matter what.
Enough to where they're never going to get one of those top prospects. So
I don't blame any team for trying to bring Brandon Aiyuk. I think he is probably in that second tier of wide receivers in the NFL.
I agree.
Why Brandon Aiyuk wants to go to Pittsburgh? Like, he was born in California. He grew up in Nevada. I don't know what the connection is.
You got a Super Bowl team. He's featured. I mean, it makes no sense.
Wouldn't shock
Yeah,
me if
like-
it's Tomlin. The Tomlin
Is the money
reason is
difference
valid.
that much? Like
It can
who's
be.
his agent? It has to be massive for like the brain
Well,
cells.
okay.
Just like
The money between San Francisco and somewhere else is massive
it
because
has to be massive.
well, San Francisco's not offering basically anything right now
Yeah.
or nothing huge. Now, is it more than what 30 million at New England? I don't think so. But yeah, also okay, let's play this out. If New England is out because he wouldn't take the 30 million, that means Aiyuk has either already made a decision that he's willing to not get a new contract and play in San Francisco, or has already made a decision somewhere else that he would rather have that. So that tells me that, like, I don't think he's given up a $30 million a year contract to stay in San Francisco, given how bad it is. It most likely is he's already said, no, I'd rather go to this, and something's in place. Because if there were still negotiations and he wasn't sure, New England wouldn't be out of it. He'd still be considering. So I think it's even more of a signal that, like, he is being traded somewhere.
I think it's just a fascinating situation because in recent years, I think it's gotten a little bit more, but you don't see trades like this in the NFL too often. Like, it's just not the NBA. It's not hockey. It's not MLB. Blockbusters just kind of are few and far between. But just Justin, from just a football perspective, let's put fantasy at, like, the Niners went through this with Debo and they were able to get through it. Clearly something's different here. If they don't get back a receiver, I know they have Pearsall, and let's see what he can be. But if he's a little slower, it severely hurts them as Super Bowl contenders. They lose arguably their best receiver. So just I was wondering,
not even arguably clear, and he can do things that no one else in the offense can. If they lost Debo, it hurts them, as we saw. You know, Debo was hurt in the Super Bowl. But like, if they lost Debo, McCaffrey can still give you a lot of that kind of ground aspect. You can still kind of manufacture other touches to players that are low ADOT, get the yards after catch. But like, Aiyuk opens up the field for them. His downfield play, like, I don't know, Ricky Pearsall, he's not there right now. Obviously, the injury doesn't help either.
No.
Juwan Jennings is not the type of player.
Yeah, what's the other rookie? Don't they have Jacob?
Yeah, they have the kid from SMU, Stallings. Is that it? Something like that.
Whatever his name is, he's not ready.
Right. So, like, it's a huge, huge hit for this year. But I also believe that the 49ers have kind of gotten to a point where he's become a cancer, and they have to accept, like, well, he's not coming, so let's figure out what we can get for him. And next year is not good for the 49ers. McCaffrey, I think, is 29. Debo up there as well. Purdy's going to start costing a lot of money. Like, this is your window.
Yeah. I guess it's just because we see it so often that teams like find a way to make it work and patch things over, especially when their window is now. I think that's what makes it ultra surprising, is that they're kind of not. And I think some of that could be when that front office and that coaching staff might just be done with him, just not salvageable. It got to a point where it's not something. But
Pittsburgh, yuck.
Cleveland's lurking. I'd like Cleveland because, especially if Cooper does go back, that could be really interesting all around, because I'd love to see what that does for Cooper's stock. It's weird. I think it's Pittsburgh. I'm intrigued what Pittsburgh gives up, because there was some reports floating, and I don't know the accuracy of them, that it's like, oh, they want Pickens. Yeah, I'm sure they do.
Pickens or Freiermuth, which Freiermuth makes no sense. But
Steelers aren't trading.
Pickens would be interesting in that offense.
But why would Pittsburgh do that?
Why would Pittsburgh do that? But I mean, if you're going to pay Aiyuk big money, I mean, Pickens is still free, but I don't know. That is not.
I mean, Pickens does become a luxury if you could get
Jacob Cowling.
Jacob Cowling from Arizona,
not SMU. I was thinking of Danny Gray. That's a name. Okay.
Round 4 guy. So if the only way to get Aiyuk is to get rid of Pickens, I do think Pickens becomes a bit of a luxury, and you're willing to do it. And what you were hoping Pickens developed into with a wider route tree, you have an Aiyuk already. So like, it would still be an upgrade for their team. Obviously, you don't want to do that, but yeah.
Justin, we want to thank you for joining the show. It was a really good draft. Obviously, you have breaking news during it. You have a lot of situations to monitor. So it's great seeing the ADP kind of change right before our eyes. Before we let you go, please tell the audience, everyone watching, where we can find all your work and all the stuff that you guys do there over at ETR.
I appreciate the invitation. This is really fun. Always good talking some ball. And yeah, you can find me Twitter at Justin Herzig, and all my stuff is at Establish the Run. That's really all. But really appreciate it. Enjoyed chatting, and yeah, fun draft.
Happy drafting, Justin. Thank you for joining us. That's going to do it for us. Terp, we'll be back most likely this Sunday for some more main event coverage. We have another Fantasy Pros Championship live draft coverage with a special guest coming on next Tuesday. And then Terp, next Monday, you and Bradley Stats drafting live in the best ball tournament, I believe. I think that's going to be
Correct.
8 or 9 p.m.
That's the plan. I think we got to figure out the time. That'll all be posted on the page.
Yep, we'll all be posting on social. Everyone, if you're new, have not played on the FFPC, use code YouTube25. You get $25 off your first team. Drafts are filling every single day. Fantasy Pros Championship has $1 million grand prize on the line, a $6 million prize pool. When you sign up for a draft, you're going to be drafting that day. So draft more, wait less with FFPC. Thank you to everyone in the chat who's talking with us. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. We will see you guys on Sunday for main event draft coverage. Get in those drafts. August is here. We will see you guys Sunday night.